Welcome, everyone, to an exciting time here at The Bunker. It's season 2 of The Bunker Talk. We're starting with episode 17. My good friend here, Suhaill Morales with SMM Law. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Suhaill. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sierra. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to start the season off with you.
Yes, I'm super excited to have you be my first guest and in our new studio. Which, still needs a little bit of love, but we're here.
But it's wonderful, and it's great to be here.
Thank you. Let's get started. Tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
So I'm an employment attorney, and I work with businesses in South Florida. Actually, I cover the entire state of Florida, but primarily in South Florida. Because I am a Spanish speaker, I focus on Hispanic-owned businesses. They're a little bit of a niche market, but they're
we are.
But they're the ones that need the most help, right?
And
I know where they're coming from. I've worked in large firms and regional firms helping businesses. I graduated in 2010 and have been doing this work since then. So I've had the opportunity to help businesses, and what really I do is I help them comply with the laws. I help make sure that they are not violating any employee laws, because employee relations are really one of the biggest costs that we're seeing nowadays for businesses. So the employment laws change a lot. So I help them with policies. I help with procedures. I help with training. I do a lot of training in English and Spanish, which is big, right?
It's huge.
Because you can have a policy, but if no one is trained on it, what good is a policy?
Well, also, let's just dive right in. Isn't that like one of the issues too? Like if you have an employee handbook and it's not in the language that they speak, couldn't that be a problem?
Well, it can and it can't. You're not required to have it in the language that they speak. But really, if you have it in another language, how do you expect them to comply?
Right.
And let's say you have an employee handbook and you have policies. If you don't provide training, you're relying on the employee to read this.
Interpretation, right.
On their own time.
Right.
The reality is it's not going to happen. Right. And more important than employee training is management training. Right? Because you want to make sure that your managers, your eyes and ears, they're the people on the floor. They're the people overseeing employees. You want to make sure they know the laws and how to comply. So you train them. You train your employees, but you train your managers, and it kind of trickles down from there. So I really do a lot, and I emphasize training. I try to provide training to my clients. I do, I have a subscription plan for my businesses where I do webinars. I try to do them on a quarterly basis, at least semi-annual webinars, but also we provide training. That's a big part of what we do. And inevitably, training policies, they don't always work.
Right.
And sometimes businesses get sued. And I'm there to help and defend all businesses in their lawsuits.
Employees is really our biggest expense as business owners and our biggest necessity.
It's 100%. And employee issues, and I say this all the time, employee issues are legal issues.
Right.
And it's not just complying. And I wrote an article this week that it's going to come out in the Florida bar about employee burnout. Right. And that's a big issue that we're seeing in 2024. And what we're seeing is that employees in 2024 expect more than just compliance with the law. Right. They want to know that you care for them. They want mental health days. They want PTO. It's not just, a good hourly rate. So I'm working with businesses to help navigating these evolving times. Right. Because the employee of today is not the employee before COVID.
No.
Let's be honest.
No. In that short amount of time, it has changed completely.
COVID did a number on us, right?
Right.
In so many ways. But I think when it comes to employees, they learned and we learned that there's so much that can be done from home. And the commute is an expense that not all employees are willing to take on now. And it really has changed. And some employers can do that. They can evolve, but some can't.
Right.
You can't wait tables from home.
Correct.
So there's this change, and how to navigate that has been really trying. But a big focus for me has been trying to help businesses, and especially Hispanic-owned businesses, to be honest with you, because what I hear a lot is, well, that's not how I used to do it in my country.
Right.
And that's not how it worked. And it's being sensitive to the fact that I know it's hard. I know it's different. But this is what you need to do to comply. And aside from that, this is what you're going to need to do to retain employees. So there's 2 different levels that I'm really, really focused on trying to help businesses and small businesses, because they're the ones that are being impacted the most right now.
Right.
Large Fortune 500.
Yeah, they got it covered. Right, they got it covered, and they know the loopholes, and they've got the the help. But the small business, doing this show has also been a lot of fun for me, and I love just to have the conversations. And my industry is very supportive of the entrepreneur part of being an insurance agency owner, but I know that not all are that way. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this. And I've learned so much about that, about how the small business owner, sometimes you just feel like it's you, like you're isolated on an island of just emotions and feelings of, you wake up and you're like, why am I doing this? Right. And then the next day it's like, this is why I'm doing it. It's a roller coaster every single day.
Absolutely.
Every single day. And so, but it's just like, there are so many things that people do not know when they get into business.
100%.
And it's impossible to keep up with everything you have to know.
When I know working with you, right? That cyber, protection. I wouldn't have thought about that, right? But to work with small businesses, that this is an issue that a lot of companies are having. So that's something you bring up, right? And that's your expertise and that's your area. And that's why people rely on you. Mm-hmm. And I think the same is important of employment laws, mm-hmm. right? You don't go to a cardiologist if you're having a problem with your leg.
Right.
So when you're talking about employment laws, there's so many changes and there's so many things that you need to have as a small business, so many protections that people just don't know as a small business.
And I think that that's why it's crucial too to go to a specialist.
Absolutely.
Like you, right?
Absolutely.
It's the same thing with us, and it's the same thing with your doctor. A generalist is not the one to go to when you have a heart problem.
100%. And when I was looking for my commercial, and business malpractice insurance, I spoke to you. That's what you focus on.
Right.
I'm not going to speak to someone who does automobile policies all the time.
Right.
And I think that's why it's so important to really think about it. There's a lot of attorneys out there who, like to be generalists and focus on a lot of things. And that's great.
But it's hard.
It's hard. And especially in an area like employment law that has so many sub areas. Someone asked me once, don't you get tired of practicing the same type of law? And I'm like, no, because there's so many areas. I mean, even within what I do, right? I can do consulting work for companies, right? And I help them comply. Then there's so many laws that they have to comply with. There's wage and hour and overtime. Mm-hmm. There's discrimination claims. There's immigration matters. Mm-hmm. So there's a realm of what I do. That's not just, okay, it's employment law. It's one area. No, but working in this area for 14 years has let me develop, I don't like to use the word expertise, but at least gain the experience that I know what's going on. Whereas sometimes people are, jack of all trades, expert of none.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And honestly, it's in no case is the same, I'm assuming, right? No. Like every employee issue is so different that it's almost like you're practicing something different every day. Like at least you're entertained.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's definitely entertaining. Sometimes I say it's, soap opera law because it's some of the claims. The only time you see a lot of overlap is these wage and hour and overtime claims, right? Because it's, they worked 40 hours or they didn't work 40 hours.
Is there an industry that you see that the most in? I would assume like restaurants and contractors. Is that?
So construction work is a big, huge area where we see it. Where there's a lot of subcontractors, cleaning companies, right? Now there's like these industrial cleaning companies that have subcontractors and independent contractors working for different places. Yeah. Whether or not they're really independent contractors.
Can we talk about that? I'm so happy you said that because that's always an issue for us with the workers' comp. Can we talk about that as far as like what Florida considers a 1099? So briefly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's important because that's probably one of the biggest claims that we see, right? And in South Florida alone, we see more lawsuits for violations of the wage and hour laws than anywhere in the whole country because it's governed by a federal law. Right? It's called the Fair Labor Standards Act. No one knows it like that. It's FLSA. And that law requires that you pay individuals for more than 40 hours worked, time and a half. And it requires you to classify certain individuals as employees. And the Department of Labor has said what the test is to determine whether someone's a contractor or an independent or an employee, right? This changes every 4 to 8 years when there's a new president elected because it varies.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, it's a general consensus of what are the economic realities. It's 6 factors now. 3 years ago, it was 2 factors.
Okay.
That was a little more employer friendly. Now it's more employee friendly, right? Because you look at who's in power. And you're looking at, do they work exclusively for you? Are you controlling their work? Do you give them a uniform?
Because those would classify them as employees.
Absolutely.
Not 1099s.
Not 1099s, right? So and then they look at the economic realities. If this person is basically making you money and you're not giving them an opportunity to make money, right? Then they're really your employee. If they're dedicating all their time to you and they don't have the opportunity to work for other businesses, right? They're your employee. If you control their schedule,
right?
They're your employee. And what I like to tell my clients is the rule is they're your employee. The exception is that they're an independent contractor.
Gotcha.
So we'll look for exceptions.
But the majority are
employees.
But the
majority are employees. And we see that's the biggest thing that I see. That the claims that are brought most against my clients are these misclassifications. And they can cost, I mean, they can be the demise of a small business.
Absolutely.
Because it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
Because what happens is when you classify someone as an independent contractor, you don't pay them overtime.
Right.
Because you're like, they're a contractor.
There it is. Yep.
Right. So if you're classifying someone as an independent contractor to avoid paying overtime, that's a sign that it's not a contractor. Right. And I'm sure you see this with the workers' comp.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because that's, and I've come across that issue when someone's like, oh, well, we don't have workers' comp insurance because
everyone's a 1099. Yeah. No, that's not the way you get around it. Yeah.
No. And it's really, really, and I think someone cannot just agree to be a contractor, right? They just because they agree doesn't mean that they can be a contractor. Because they can't waive that right. That's a right. That's a law that they're entitled to. So that just because they say no, I don't want to. And
I'll handle it's the conversation usually goes, no, I don't want to pay the taxes. I'll do it on my own.
Exactly.
It's always about taxes.
It's
the conversation's always about the taxes, and that's it's so much more than that when it comes down to
absolutely
this.
And then it's also, and what I see is in the industries where people don't want to work, right? So you're talking about construction, you're talking about deliveries. I have clients who are like in the warehouse where people don't really want to work. Those jobs, it is not having the proper documentation, right? So you can't be a W-2 employee or an employee because you don't have authorization. So they classify them as independent contractors.
And they still have a legal right to sue their employer?
And that's when they're surprised. They still have a legal right to sue. They can still sue under the Fair Labor Standards Act, even if they were not authorized to work.
Oh,
they are still entitled to their minimum hourly rate and overtime.
Interesting.
And that's what surprises most of my clients.
It is surprising. Well, because you would think, well, they don't have the authorization to work, so why do they have the legal right? Right. But that doesn't get them out.
It doesn't because it's the employer's burden.
It's the duty of the employer.
It's their duty. And in Florida, there's an even stronger duty because last year in July of 2023, DeSantis passed a law that if you're working with unauthorized workers, you can get fined.
Yep.
And or up to your business can get closed. So it made it much more difficult because now it's no longer, you just have employees. If you are 1099ing these workers because they're not documented and the Florida FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement conducts an investigation, you can get fined the first time and they can close your business. So there's so many layers.
It's so complicated.
And what I hear is, what's the loophole? How can I get
it's always a thing of loophole, right? It's so short-sighted too to run a business that way. Like, why open a business if you're going to run it that way when, it's most people put everything they have into this. Like, why risk everything you have?
And then you get hit with a lawsuit and then you're surprised, right? I'm like,
how are you surprised?
Every time. And I'm like, we talked about this. Right. And that's, one thing about me, and maybe it's a good quality, maybe it's a bad quality. Sometimes my husband says I'm not the best attorney because I'm not trying to make a lot of money.
Right.
But I'm candid. Right. I tell my clients, this is a reality. This is what you're doing wrong. And this is how you can avoid it. If they get hit with these wage and hour lawsuits, I tell them, you need to pay, you need to settle. And that's the end of it. Or you can pay me.
Right.
Hey, I'm
That's
happy to take the
for.
money.
Right.
3 kids, college tuition that I'm saving for, right?
We got kids to feed.
Exactly. But it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And sometimes I've had clients get upset at me, right? They're like, oh, well, you're showing weakness. I'm like, No, the law's against you.
Right. No, actually, you're going to lose.
You're going to lose.
And you can still pay me.
Yeah.
It's, do you want to pay me a little or do you want to pay me a lot? Because I'm here.
Hey, I'll take the lot.
Right.
But you're going to end up paying this money anyway.
Right.
So you can pay me now.
And also, it's the dark cloud of it hanging over you, your business overall. The employees know it's happening. It just creates a cloud of, and it also kind of lets other employees that are maybe unhappy know, well, I could do the same.
And the longer it goes on,
Yes.
the longer you're exposed
Yes.
to more individuals joining.
Correct.
More going on. You allow the other attorney to depose employees. It opens up your doors.
Right.
So it makes no sense. It sucks.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
That's the most legal term for it. Right. It sucks.
Right.
But, you know, sometimes it really is sheer ignorance.
Right.
They did not realize. Yeah. Other times they were trying to,
the loopholes.
Loophole it, right? Yeah.
So then on that subject, if someone's new in business, what are the, best couple tips that you can give that are kind of low-hanging fruit to avoid getting into these issues?
Know the state that you're in. If you have employees in multiple states, know that the laws vary, right? That's very important. Florida is an at-will state. So if you're in Florida, make sure that all your offer letters, all your documentation says at will. So you can terminate that employee at any time for any reason. Because what I see is sometimes they say, oh, this is good for 1 year. And now you've created a contract of a year. My biggest recommendation is hire slow, fire fast, right? And then hiring is the most important thing any business can do. It's critical because you can avoid 90% of lawsuits during the hiring phase because people show you who they are. And if you do your job right, if you take your time, you can avoid some claims. Sometimes you can't. I mean, that's the reality. But if you hire correctly, it really, really makes a difference. The other thing, I think probably the third and one of the most important things is documentation is key. Everything that happens in the employment realm should be documented. The hiring, documented. Any expectations should be documented and provided to the employee. And anything that goes wrong, any actions should be documented, even if they're what we call verbal warnings, right? Follow up with an email saying, we met, we spoke, this is what you did wrong, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to correct it, and this is what's going to happen if you don't. Documentation changes everything. It's my first line of defense in a lawsuit, but it also shows the employee. It sets up their expectations because let's be honest, we have so much going on that who remembers what you talked about?
Right. No, that's impossible.
So here you're writing it down, from the policies, from the job description to the counseling, right? Here's your job description. This is what I expect you to do. So now when they didn't do it, here's your counseling. This is what you were doing. This is what I expected. And this is how you do it correctly. And very importantly, this is what's going to happen if you do it again. Right? Because now
and then follow through with what you say is going to happen
every time, right? Because don't make false threats.
Right. Because then they keep doing it. And then what are you going to do? Well, you let it happen 4 or 5 times and nothing happened.
Yeah. And that takes me to the fourth point, consistency. Consistency is key. If you don't enforce it for one person, but you enforce it for the other, that opens you up to a discrimination claim.
Right.
Right? Because let's be honest, we're a melting pot.
Right.
Everyone basically is a protected category. And if you're enforcing something, maybe you're just enforcing it because that's your friend or not enforcing it because you like that person. But if you're enforcing it, because let's say you're enforcing it only against this person, we'll call him X, and then not against Y. And Y just happens to be your buddy that you go golfing with. But Y is a male and X is a female. Well, even though it's not your reason, does it seem like the reason?
Right.
So I think those are really the keys that I would say, always make sure that you document and that you're consistent because consistency can really take you a long, long way. And I've seen it. And everyone's like, oh, well, that wasn't the reason that I did it.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
What's the perceived reason?
And what is a jury going to say?
Right.
And when I talk about documentation, I mean documentation is just so important because if you're ever in a trial, that's what's going to be before a jury. So you need to be detailed. You need to be factual. If the person comes in, using profanity, use the words that they use, right? Don't say that person cursed a storm.
Right.
Well, no, that doesn't seem as impactful as if you actually use those words, right?
Document the words.
Yeah, imagine you're getting up in front of a jury and then you're like, this person said, and they're like,
right.
It's so important. And I find that is the biggest weakness in most management because no one wants to be the bad guy. Right. I mean, it doesn't play well.
It doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good. Right. I mean, except apparently for me, because this is what but I'll tell you, even in my own business, I have a hard time sometimes. Right?
Isn't that funny that you could do it for others, but not yours?
Exactly. It's easy in theory, right? The concept. Right. But then you grow and you have these relationships.
Well, we're spending more time with our employees than our families
100%
for most times. So, you develop a relationship and then you also know that they have families they're supporting. And so you don't want to be the person to cut that, or alter their lifestyles when they have children. It is a tough time.
But if you do it from the onset,
right, then they don't know any different. It's always been that way.
And you possibly avoid having to terminate them.
Right.
Because you've set up the expectation of what you need.
Right.
What I see a lot is, we expect employees to meet this standard that no one has really explained.
Right.
It's not in writing anywhere, and maybe it's, vague. So then we have this expectation, then they fail to meet it.
Then we get mad.
Right. But we don't document and tell them how they failed and how they can improve it.
There's a gentleman in our space who has an incredible insurance agency. He's up in North Florida, and every conference that we go to, his name is Billy Wagner. Every conference that we go to, he's always the process guy or like the culture guy. Tells us how he runs his staff and his employees and the stuff that they do for their culture. And one of the times that I heard him speak, he said something that has always stayed with me, and it's based off what you're saying. And he said, to be unclear is to be unkind.
And that's absolutely true.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's like when you're upset with one of your employees because they're not meeting an expectation, it made me think to myself, did I really make it clear that was an expectation? Or is it in my head that I think they should understand that that's what I expect?
Yeah.
And then that kind of creates this resentment. And then maybe you start treating them different. And it's all because I was unclear.
Right. And so sometimes you have to check yourself.
Right.
Because we're human.
Absolutely. And we're busy too.
And we're busy too.
Especially if you have, 15 employees, like
even if you have two,
right?
Because two people is a lot of people to keep track of sometimes.
Right.
But it's so important to check yourself,
right,
and be honest with yourself. And it happens to me. I mean, I'm an employment attorney. I do this day and night, and sometimes I'm like, oh, did I communicate that? I'm like, I'm expecting her to do this, and I didn't explain it the right way because I was busy. Right. Because I didn't have the time.
Also, one of the things I've recently realized is also just everyone doesn't hear the information the same. So like you just said, did I communicate this clearly? You might have for your standards, right? Especially if you are blunt, when you deal with people that maybe don't receive bluntness because they get offended or their feelings are hurt initially, they don't hear what you're saying because they're so offended.
Right.
And some people need to read it in an email. Some people you need to tell it to them. Some people you need to put a poster. Like I recently heard, I'm a part of the Daily Drip and our community partner, Lisa, who is an HR guru. We're actually going to have her on the show soon. She actually said, you need to say things 7 times to your staff for them to recognize that you've said it once.
And I believe that. And it's true. And I think there also has to be different. And that's why I think the
different
documentation is so important, right? Because I told you, and I think the communication is very important. Right. So I'm going to tell you what I expect. Right. But I'm also going to give it to you in writing.
Right.
Because
so if you didn't hear it,
now you see it.
You're seeing it.
And you can go back. Right. So if you're telling someone that they did something wrong and this is what you expect of them, they leave there, they're upset, right? They're emotional. Right. Sometimes. And they're like, oh, well, what did they tell me to do? Right. And it happens to me sometimes, right?
All the time. It happens to me all the time.
I have to write everything down. And so you give them this warning, an email, anything. And they, right, trying to cover my bases here, can go back and say, oh, that's right. This is what it was. And it's helpful. Very. You know, it not giving them documentation cheats them and it cheats you.
Right. It's harmful for both parties.
Both.
Yeah.
Both. And that's why, if you're, and I love that, if you're unclear, you're unkind. If you're clear from the beginning, you can avoid a termination.
Right. Right.
Because you've set the expectation.
Maybe we wouldn't even get there.
You won't even get there. I mean, sometimes you got to get there.
Well, listen, and sometimes they leave on their own. That's fine. Like
Yeah.
it happens, but it would definitely lessen the frequency of it when it's, well, people want, I think that even myself, accountability is not my strong suit because I feel like I'm micromanaging, and I feel like also accountability makes them, it gives them the expectation that they also have to hold me accountable.
Right.
So that, I think that's also why some employers will just take it easy on the documentation or on those things, because then that the employee is also keeping track of what you say.
Absolutely.
So it's accountability both ways, which I think some people fear.
And it's also more work.
It's also more work.
More
right.
work. And for some of my clients that have like managers, and the managers are expected to do this, what I see is that the managers don't want to.
Right.
Because it adds something to their plate. They can pull someone over in the hallway and say, hey, you didn't do this, and think that's enough. Right? Instead of documenting, because that's going to take some more time.
Right.
But once you get into the habit of it, it just becomes natural. So yes, it might take an additional few minutes, but it's going to save you so much time down the line. And if you're ever in a lawsuit, it's not he said, she said.
Right. Right. It's
right?
facts.
It's okay. Maybe it's he said, she said, but here's what the documentation shows. Right. So there's no,
and especially
question.
if it's shared with the employee and they didn't object it at the time, or say that didn't happen.
And even if they object, at least it's there.
Right.
Because what happens sometimes, and the employee will make a complaint about something after, right? And then the employee ultimately gets fired. The employee says, I was only fired after I made this complaint. And if you have no documentation before they made the complaint, well, that's what it looks like.
Right.
But if you have documentation showing, I met with her, I spoke to her about this, or him. I spoke, then they made this complaint. Ultimately, they continued to do it, so I fired. You can show that the complaint was just there, but it's not a cause.
Right.
Right? But if you don't, and this happens a lot, I mean, it happens so many times. And, sometimes the complaint is a valid complaint, and sometimes the complaint is just kind of a CYA.
Right.
I see the writing on the wall, so I'm going to complain about something.
Complaint. Yep.
And it's unfortunate. And when I see that, I'm like, you have this lawsuit. I understand that it's unfounded. There's no basis to it, but you have no documentation.
Right.
So, and it's a hard conversation to have with your clients, and even clients that I've worked with sometimes for a long time. They'll say, "Oh, we got this new manager, and we didn't know that they weren't documenting." And that's part of the training, right? And part of the training that I give, there's a management training that is basically, hiring to firing, everything in between.
That's great.
Right? What managers need to do, how they should hire, what they should do during the hiring process. Surprisingly, what they can and can't say during an interview, because you'd be surprised what people still think they can ask during an interview. When were you born?
Oh my God.
Where's your accent from? But, it kind of walks them through that. And I really, really, I mean, I stress this to my clients. That training is invaluable.
Absolutely.
Because if your managers don't know how to hire, if they don't know how to document,
they definitely don't know how to fire.
If they don't know what to do when they receive a complaint, right, then firing
is a disaster.
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
Because firing should be easy if you've done it all correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Because you have it lined up. Right. It's all set up.
Ultimately, when you fire someone like that, the employee did it to themselves.
Right.
Really, it's
and
not you.
most of the time, they know it's coming.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So they see the writing on the wall. They know it's coming. They have the write-ups. It shouldn't be a surprise because what happens and the calls sometimes that we see and the defense from employees is, I was fired and I never got any warning. No one ever gave me a written write-up before I was fired. So it has to be because I'm X, Y, or Z.
Right.
So, and I see this all the time. And I'm like, well, if you just had that documentation, if you just had these write-ups, then that employee wouldn't be surprised. And sometimes, and I tell people this because sometimes my clients get really offended, right? I'm like, but that's their truth. This is that individual's truth. They were surprised. They were caught off guard because they had no warning up to that point that they were going to be terminated. There was nothing documented.
Right.
So now they're hit with a termination for performance issues.
Right.
And they're like, what performance issues? So a surprised employee is an angry employee. And an angry employee is more likely to sue.
Right.
So those are things that really small businesses and big businesses, right?
Yeah. Well, the difference is that the big businesses have the resources,
right,
to deal with it. We don't.
They do, and a lot of small businesses don't have an HR department.
Right.
And that's part of my subscription plan. Is I work as a legal kind of in-house HR.
Great.
It's
so valuable.
Yep. Right. And they call me any questions. Hiring. I'm thinking about hiring this person. I recently had someone call me, we really like this candidate. They told me I didn't have authorization to work. What can I do? Well, is there a process through the visa, right? Through the immigration process that we can use so that you can hire them? Let's explore those options. I have this employee, I need to write them up. We'll write them up. Here's this template that you should be using moving forward, right?
Invaluable what you do.
And
prevention is always cheaper.
Yeah, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure.
Yep.
And my clients who have these programs, you pay for it up front, right? So once you're paying for a service, you're going to use it.
Right.
As opposed to sometimes I have a client that'll retain me for a litigation, then I won't hear from them until they get sued again. Right? And I'm like, isn't this the exact same issue?
Why don't we
had?
This?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
But we need those kids. We
got the 3 kids.
And they eat so much. Right?
That's hilarious.
Snacks hilarious. All the time.
Oh my God. I mean, I don't blame them.
Oh my God. I love snacks too.
I bet you there's some snacks in that purse.
Oh, are you kidding?
This is such valuable information. I could talk to you for hours about this. This is, it's one of the biggest struggles that we all have as business owners. So this is invaluable, but I definitely want to talk to you about other things because I know that you're a huge component for women in your space, in the law space. Talk to us about your journey about being a woman in your space. Talk to us about the power of mentorship in your space, all that stuff in the law, because I'm doing it in my space, right? But I think they're very similar.
Yeah.
Our industries are very similar in the sense of it is somewhat male dominated. Women are usually not owners.
Yeah.
And also, we face the threat of the internet, right?
100%.
Where people think they could do it online versus needing an advisor. So we share
all
those.
The time. So, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's big. And it is absolutely still a male dominated space. Even though we see a lot more, women attorneys, it's still, especially in the defense world, right? In the employment defense world, it is mostly a male dominated space. I remember when I was in law school, I had an internship at the AUSA's office at the, prosecuting federal crimes. So these internships are cool because you actually get the opportunity to practice. So you're going to hearings, and I went to a hearing with a federal magistrate judge, and I'm waiting for a bond hearing. I'm sitting at the table where the attorneys sit for the AUSA's office, the assistant U.S. attorney, and the defense attorney on the other side was an old man. And, the judge says, "Are we ready?" And he gets up before I have an opportunity to, and he says, "I'm just waiting for the AUSA." And I said, "Your Honor, Suhaill Morales here on behalf of the United States." And he says, literally on the record, and wow, they didn't make them like that when I was in law school. And I was like,
oh my God.
Wow. Right? So, this is me in law school.
How long ago was that?
This was 15 years ago.
Wow.
Right? Not that long ago,
No.
right? Considering I also went on an interview where I later heard that I didn't get the job because I wore a pantsuit and women are supposed to wear skirt suits. And this was in 2009, right? I'm not talking about a very long time ago.
No.
So there's so many areas where there's still...
That is crazy.
Yes. And I'm sometimes it feels like if you watch the movie Barbie, it's literally impossible, right? Because then if you wear a pantsuit, you're seen as intimidating or too dominant, or, if you don't wear a pantsuit,
you never win.
You never win, right? So there's just so many areas, and it's hard. It is hard because I recently, was speaking to someone and they said, I was buying this big acquisition, this property, and the attorney that came down from New York was a 5'2", female, and we thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. But she showed us, right, that she was great. And I'm like, well,
why would it be interesting?
Why would she have to show you, right?
But also why? Like, why is your first reaction, oh, this is going to, interesting in what sense?
In what sense?
What are you talking about?
And this is still, this is 2024, and I'm hearing this comment, and I'm like, well, for the record, I'm a 5'2" female attorney, and I really, really love when men like you underestimate me.
Oh, yes.
Right? Because I am a fantastic lawyer. I am well known in my space. I'm a mediator, and I've been recognized in so many different categories, and still it always feels like we have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition, right? And I'm okay with that because it's just what it's dealt with. Right. But it sucks. And there's always this perception of, if you're assertive, you're aggressive, right? And I can't tell you the partners that have called me, names that are expletives because, I was too assertive. And I didn't always have to be a, nice person like that. And the reality is that our male counterparts don't face it. Nope. Right. And that's part of why I worked at law firms. I was a partner at a law firm. And really when I thought about my future and the future I wanted for my kids, I wanted to really focus on a powerful woman making it, right? Because I had made it. I was a partner at a law firm. I had established myself. I had a great reputation, but there was still so much more.
There was still a ceiling.
There's still a ceiling. And I saw my male counterparts being treated a little differently, which I won't get into here because it doesn't matter.
No,
honestly.
Well, and the thing is that there's always the good old boys club.
Oh, always.
Even, I would say, there are men that want to see us excel and they give us opportunities, and some of them still go back to the good old boys club.
Absolutely.
They help us, but they still have their club.
100%. Yeah. And I will say there's a lot of men that are very helpful, and they're willing to, bet on you. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And I've had that.
I have a lot of them.
I have had a lot of them. But at the end of the day, we still are what we are, right? And there's always this notion of, if you're of child rearing age, right? Is she going to have kids and then take time off? Well, why does that matter? Right. Because I will tell you that when I had twins in 2021, I still billed as many hours that year as my other male partner. So we're just more efficient. Maybe. So yeah. I will tell you, I have to juggle all the time. And it's sad because I don't feel that there's enough strong women mentors.
I would agree.
I was lucky. I went to law school in New York. I went to Fordham Law, and we had some really strong women mentors. We had especially some strong women Latina mentors that were wonderful, right? And I had one that she was great. She was a lawyer in New York. I went to law school in New York. I came down to Miami. So when I came down to Miami, I didn't really have, I'm a first-generation college graduate, first-generation law school graduate. Yeah. So I don't come from a family of lawyers.
Right.
And thankfully, one of my sister's best friends, his mom was a lawyer at a big law firm. And she really acted as a mentor, and she was incredibly helpful. And during my time at big firms, I had some women who served in some capacity as a mentor role. But I also saw some women that just wanted to knock you down, which is incredibly frustrating. So for me, part of what I've always done is really try to mentor women. I think if you've made it, I'm not going to say to the top because I'm not at the top, but if you've made it anywhere, turn around, look back, and pick someone up. Yep. Right? Just extend your arm because there's so many women in this field. And seeing it recently as a young mom, I see the young moms struggling, right? And leaving.
Right.
There's been such an exodus from our profession because they don't have the resources. They don't have the mentorship, and they're really treated differently. So I always, I try to make it a point to tell them it's hard. It is really hard, right? No one's going to take this. It is hard. Don't let anyone tell you differently. But it is also doable because we can do hard things as women because we always have had to. So anyone who's ever reached out to me knows that I go to lunch with young women attorneys. I talk to them. I mentor them. I do whatever I can within my scope. And if I know someone that's hiring, I always try to make sure that they're placed, they're hired with good people.
Yep.
If I know that they're in a bad environment, because it happens, I try to like find them an escape route. Right.
You know, I've never been around so many attorneys as I have since joining Miss Esquire, and I love that organization. I love Rise and Trish, and I realized that there are so many. I've heard that so much from, obviously, the men are allowed in the group, but it's predominantly, you know, women attorneys, and the majority of them have left the firms they're working in, and they're doing their own thing, and that's the number one thing that I hear. It's just like, you know, we're treated so different.
So differently.
And I rather just do it for myself.
Absolutely. And there's no feeling of self, you know, gratification.
Right.
As doing it for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, it's hard.
Oh, listen.
You know, because we were talking about this earlier. You wear all the hats, right?
I mean,
sometimes you're even an IT person, and I
right.
don't even know how to turn on my computer at times. But you know, it's hard, but it's also so gratifying, right? To know that you built this.
Right.
This is yours, and sure, you may be putting in some late hours. Yeah. But they're yours.
But in your guys' space, you guys are putting in the late hours anyways.
100%.
You're just doing it for somebody else. I mean, you work so much. And that's one of the things that I've heard from many of the women in the group. It's like, you know, I was working there and I was told by the owners, all the partners that happened to be men, like, well, you can't leave before I leave.
And that's so.
And I was just like, what?
At my last firm, that really wasn't the issue for me. But I worked at a big firm where there was an expectation that you could not leave before the partners. I was an associate, a young associate at this time. It was a big firm. So you couldn't leave before the partners because one of the partners would literally walk around before leaving on the way out to make sure associates were there.
Wow.
And there was this expectation that you would be there on a Saturday. I mean, if you don't have the work,
right,
there's no reason to be there. But there was this like FaceTime requirement, right? That is so stupid. Honestly,
right.
There's no point.
No.
But it was there, and it is there in some places. Mm-hmm. And you just have to find a place that is welcoming. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hope to promote with my firm, a place that's welcoming to women, men, people, sure, you know, everyone, because it sucks. Mm-hmm. We work and we spend the majority of our time working. And if you feel uncomfortable in your workplace, it's
you're not
terrible.
Even producing your best work.
No. And you mentioned groups like Miss Esquire. I mean, things like that, I think, are key mm-hmm. for us, right? Mm-hmm. You know, being a woman and having a group of other like-minded women to talk to vent, you know, about it. It's just having women. It's not the same.
So it's funny because I'm giving this presentation for women in insurance. And that's actually one of the points I make about how we can make an impact in this industry. And it's one of them is by community, right? And absolutely. Creating a community. And one thing is most women have a personal community, but especially moms, right? They might have like a mom community, but maybe those women or some of those women are not the same people that would support you professionally.
Right.
You have to have a professional support system as 100%. Well.
100%.
And one of the things I talk about is that as far as like, it doesn't matter how supportive all of the men in your life are, nothing beats a conversation with a woman that understands you.
Oh, 100%. And you have to have these women. And if you're a mom, having other moms, you
absolutely.
know, in my group, I've met women through Miss Esquire and through other groups that I've been in that are mom attorneys, right?
Right.
And some
so that's perfect.
And they're just,
right.
I mean, the things that we experience.
Right. I don't. You and I don't.
Right.
We're two women in business, right? We could talk about that, but I'm not a mom and I'm not an attorney.
Right. It's not the same.
It's not 100% the same.
And it's just so incredible to have that. And I, mm-hmm. you know, have a group chat with some of them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like, you know, it's empowering. And it's comforting.
It's comforting.
And it's this like, you know, I sent out a text last night and it was like, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm doing too many things. And then immediately it's like, we do too much. Like, you know, let's have grace on ourselves. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. But these communities of women are so important. And I know in some of these groups, you know, men are infiltrating and that might be fine, but it's so important to have these spaces for women only because mm-hmm. sometimes the truth is that we censor ourselves around men.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's things that we wouldn't talk about in front of men. We feel that at the Daily Drip, we had our meeting, this last meeting that we had, and it was really, really powerful. And it's always talking about like, so not always, but like this one was like super vulnerable where we were talking about that. And it was one of those things where it's just like, and there's men that would support hearing it
sure.
and help us. That's fine. But it's just, we're able to be so honest.
Yes.
because we don't have to hold back out of fear of, and I actually had said it, that sometimes if there were men in the room, maybe we would be looked at as like less of a professional.
Right.
Because we're struggling.
Right. Absolutely.
Where when it's a group of women, I don't think you're a bad attorney because you're telling me that you're struggling this week.
100%.
I actually think you're a better attorney because you're not giving up.
And you're being honest with yourself,
being honest,
right? And I agree. And, for me, my husband is, my strongest supporter, my biggest ally. He's an ally for women, women's rights, everything. He's great. But at the end of the day, he's still a man, right? So sometimes, and sometimes, to be honest, we don't say things not to hurt their feelings.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because we're the superior. No, I'm just kidding. No, but the way we say things to each other might come off the wrong way to a man, right? And it's not that we're trying to bash them, because it's nothing about that. It's just women need women.
That's it. It's that simple.
We need each other, and having that community without their little heads peeping in, to give us their opinion, is so important. So whether you're in, insurance, you're in medicine, my sister's an emergency room doctor, and I know they have a women, group in medicine,
Great.
Women in Medicine, I think is what they're called. That group of like-minded, and women who are going through your same experiences, you need it. Because if you don't have it, and I remember, I'll just say when I had my first child, everything seemed like it was me, right? Because our generation really, before then, no one really talked about the struggles, and it was how wonderful motherhood is and how great it is. And it is, it's fantastic, but it's incredibly hard, right? So when my son was up all night for 3 nights and I felt like I was failing, I felt like a failure.
Right.
But once I spoke to other moms in the same, era that we were in, I realized this is not a me problem.
Right.
This is a mom problem that we all experience.
So back to my presentation, I do talk about that too, because I'm highlighting Beyonce and Taylor Swift and their careers in the music industry and what they've done for the economy. And we talk about that because there's a movie that Beyonce made maybe 2020, maybe 2018-ish. And she talks about that, about how her mom had a salon and the women would walk in defeated, and they'd sit in that chair, they'd get their hair done, and they'd walk out confident again. And it wasn't just about their physical appearance, but it was the venting session. And she says that she realized that most women have the same insecurities, the same abilities, and the same struggles. So that's why it's so important to have each other, because it wasn't just you. Anybody would be going insane after 3 nights of not sleeping and having to go to work.
Absolutely.
It's not just you.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that for our careers, our life stage as women matter so much when we get opportunity.
Yeah. It's
not because we're a woman.
Yeah.
It's because you're a mom.
Yeah.
And you have other pressing responsibilities.
Right.
And it's I look at my mom, right? My mom worked she was a career woman. She worked for Equifax, outside sales. I remember putting presentations together for her, like at night for her big meetings. And like, she did it. I just happened to not have children, but you can do it. And you're showing your daughter,
right?
You could have both.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have one over the other anymore. And I think that's awesome for us, right? Because
Absolutely.
our moms, I don't think they got that.
Right.
At least mine didn't. My mom just did it.
Yeah, my mom was a single mom raising 2 girls, right? So she worked, and she worked
did it
sometimes
all.
3 jobs,
right?
And she did it all. But the thing about my mom, and I said this recently, is that she never complained, right? and like that was part of what I started to experience when I was a first time mom. I'm like, how did she do this without complaining, right? But it was kind of a generational thing. You don't really complain.
Well, she also might have just talked to people in her, maybe her little circle.
Maybe, but I think really their generation just didn't complain, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're not like us.
Well, they're stronger.
Yeah.
They're built different.
They weren't tapping into their feelings or their emotions. But
also, it was a different society.
Completely different.
The societal pressure that we live in as women now has changed
100%.
drastically.
Yeah. And I mean, I read this meme the other day. And I laughed because it said, imagine we were sent to school without a water bottle and like all of this stuff, and we survived. And I think
and
about
now every kid has a Yeti.
You have to send the water bottle, 3 snacks for this, and I'm like, Jesus,
sure, yeah.
And make sure they're in extracurriculars.
Can't have crust on the bread,
It's mind blowing, the expectations, and and I'm a huge I'm a huge proponent of women, and I think of the space, and I would never want to go back to the 1950s ever,
right?
In any respect. But one thing that happened is when we gained the rights to work, we didn't lose the requirement to keep up the home.
Right.
Right. So we just took on more. And, and that's the reality. Right. So we run a business now, but we're also still expected to run a home. Too.
Right. You're running a home and a business.
Yeah. So that happens to women, whether you have children or not. Yeah. Right. You're still the woman of the house, right? Whatever that means.
Right.
And there's still things that fall on us because it fell on us before. And it just kind of got ingrained. And I think it's really important for women to talk about that, and also to start kind of delegating and pushing it off, and to have a partner that's supportive.
Absolutely.
And if they're not, you make them supportive, right? Yeah.
Then they're paying for the help.
Right. And that is so important that you said that, because I think part of what, as a mom who's a business owner, everyone talks about a village, right? It takes a village, and it takes a village, but not everyone has a village. No. So what we don't tell people, and what I tell young women attorneys, and I just had this conversation with an acquaintance who had a baby recently, it takes a village, and sometimes that village is a village we pay for.
Absolutely.
And there is no shame in it. And there was all this shame, I think initially about women and having help because we had to do it all. No. If someone can come clean our house so I can spend that time with my kids, right, that's what we're doing. Right.
Absolutely.
And if I need someone to help me pick up my kids,
well, it's the concept of the value of your time.
100%.
Your value, your time is more valuable than cleaning, not just cleaning in general, but any activity that you do outside of either running your business or spending time with your children that's unnecessary and it can be delegated, then your family wins.
Absolutely.
That's the reality of it.
And there is no shame in it.
Absolutely none.
Absolutely none. So any help that you need.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
and it's so important.
Yeah.
It is, whether you have kids or not.
Right. 100%.
Because, I that's been my non-negotiable. I'm not spending my Saturdays cleaning. Right. Well, we have so much going on.
And you should also be resting too. You also have to rest at that point. So you want to spend time with your children. You need to rest. You need to regroup for the week. You need to still work.
It's all the time.
Yeah.
So it's really important. And I think knowing that, knowing that it's okay.
Right. Sometimes you just need permission.
You need permission. Yeah. And you should give yourself permission.
Absolutely.
I think we need more compassion.
100%.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's my step one.
To wrap it up here, give me a couple qualities that you think a woman in leadership should have. Maybe for a woman that's coming into the workforce that can see herself being that person, right? What do you think it takes to make it as in law and business?
I think it takes one, dedication, right? Whether you call it perseverance or dedication, an unwavering desire to have something and to get it done. Not being moved by other people's opinions of you. You need to have a thick skin.
Yeah.
But you also, and I think this is almost more important, you need to be compassionate. Because to be a true leader, I think you need to be compassionate with others and with yourself. You need to know that some days you're going to be at the top. Right. And some days, what is it they say? Some days you're the pigeon, sometimes you're the statue, right? And you need to be compassionate with yourself because it is hard and it is a journey. And if you look at the path to success, it's not a straight line.
Never.
So I think really those are the key, traits. I think someone who's, strong, has thick skin, but is also compassionate because you can't be strong and ignorant to people's needs and your needs.
Right.
Because you're not going to make it.
Right.
And it just doesn't work out.
No. This was awesome.
This is fun.
The time went by so fast. I can't believe it. I could talk to you for hours about anything.
I know. I really enjoy every time we get together.
Yeah, and we don't do it enough.
No, we really don't. And we're not that far from each other.
No, we found that out today. Yeah, for sure. Tell everybody, where can they find you?
So you can find me. My website is www.smmsammarymary.lawfirm.com. You can also find me on Instagram. It's SMM Law Firm, or on Facebook.
Yep. And we'll put it all in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sierra, for having me. And thank you for always engaging me.
No, it's easy. And thank you for the help you provide my clients.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Alrighty.